To preface, this isn't going to be a Brendan Urie hate video. I don't support him. I think he's done many, many terrible things. However, making a video that is primarily just a list of his misdeeds would actively make me miserable, and that is not what I set out to do in the content that I create. So that's not what this video's gonna be. And second off, a content warning for the video. There are mentions of drug use, drug-related crimes, and alcoholism. Drug use and drug-related crimes are at the end of part 2, and the mentions of alcoholism are near the end of part 6, but they are discussed within the context of recovery. I will try to include timestamps, but be aware, keep yourself safe. Panic at the Disco is a band with a long and storied history, filled head to toe with drama and scandal. When a band slowly shrinks from a breakthrough teenage four-piece into a degrading solo project, people are bound to be interested, casting heroes and villains in every situation, projecting interpersonal feelings that haven't been in any way made public. The story of Panic at the Disco is almost a teenage soap opera, and when you've learned about this band for years, seeing many sides in the fan world, you start to wonder, was Panic doomed from the start? And that's the question that I set out to answer by diving into the history of this interesting band. Hi, I'm Elliot Taylor, and this is Was Panic Doomed from the Start? Panic at the Disco was a pop-rock band from Las Vegas, Nevada, formed initially by childhood friends guitarist Ryann Ross and drummer Spencer Smith. They started playing Blink-182 covers together when they started high school, but later on decided to be a real band, recruiting bassist Brent Wilson and now vocalist Brendan Urie, who originally tried out on guitar. Their first 2 demos, Time to Dance Because Boys Will Be Boys, shortened to Time to Dance, and Relax Relapse, renamed Camisado, were posted to Pure Volume in 2004. They were recorded on Ross's laptop, and if you listen to them now, it's very obvious Urie's strained, obviously barely edited vocals, the incredibly rough mixing, the mess-ups in their timing. These demos are recorded by teenagers on some kid's 2004-era laptop. And the first thing that they did, after posting them, was sending them to Pete Wentz of Fall Out Boy on LiveJournal. And Pete Wentz liked it enough to drive out to Las Vegas and watch them rehearse. And then liked them enough to sign them as the first band on his new record label, Decadence. After signing to Decadence, the band moved out to College Park, Maryland to record their debut record. Working 12 to 14 hours a day and living in a one-bedroom apartment with bunk beds, they put together a fever you can't sweat out, split in 2 between the techno scene dance punk first half and the vaudeville cabaret second half. They played their first show at local Las Vegas venue The Alley on West Charleston sometime in the summer of 2005, 2 weeks after they finished the record, according to Ross. They then went out on the 2005 Nintendo Fusion Tour, supporting Fall Out Boy, The Starting Line, Motion City Soundtrack, and Boys Night Out, which began just a day after Fever's release on September 27th, 2005. The record peaked at number 13 on the Billboard 200, and the first single, I Write Sins Not Tragedies, peaked at number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100. Now, if you're not incredibly familiar with everyone who's ever been in Panic at the Disco, you might have been caught off guard by something I said earlier. Bassist Brent Wilson. Yeah, Brent Wilson, Panic at the Disco's first bassist. Wilson went to school with Brendan Urie and was the one who encouraged him to try out for the band. On May 17th, 2006, the band announced that Wilson had left the band, which did not cite any reasoning for his departure. Ross stated in an email to MTV News that it was simply a decision the band made together, and it was sad to see him go and sad to see the fans taking it so poorly. Until June 2006, this is all the information about Wilson's exit we had, outside of speculation from fans and a MySpace account claiming to be Wilson's brother. On June 12th, 2006, MTV sat down with Wilson at his home in Las Vegas. Wilson says that he was kicked out of the band the day before they'd leave for a show for musical reasons.
It was done as a phone call, and the only person who spoke was Spencer. Apparently, Brendan and Ryann were on the speakerphone too, but they didn't say a word. They never even said they were sorry. We were about to start a tour where the band would have been bringing home around $300,000 or something like $50,000 apiece, and basically they kicked me out, so the question about money goes through my head a lot, and I believe it. Brendan and Ryann can both play multiple instruments, and Spencer handles a lot of the business, so that sort of leaves me as the odd person out.
When the band was reached out for comment on this, Smith said in an email,
"We made the decision based on Brent's lack of responsibility and the fact that he wasn't progressing musically with the band. Brent did not write any of his bass parts on the record. Brent did not record one note of bass on the record. Brendan and Ryann wrote all of the bass parts, and Brendan recorded all of the bass parts. We had to simplify some of the bass parts that were recorded because Brent could not play them live. Our record would have sounded absolutely the same even if Brent wasn't in the band during the writing or recording process."
Smith also dismisses Wilson's money worries, as the cost of the production on their shows would mean that they are just breaking even with the revenue they'll make from this tour.
Brent showed no interest in the business side of the band. Therefore, he really doesn't have any idea what is going on money-wise with the band.
Panic at the Disco began their first headliner in June of 2006, with new bassist John Walker. On August 7th, 2006, Brent Wilson and his lawyer began legal proceedings against Panic at the Disco, mailing the band a letter asking for what he says are his owed royalties from A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. If they responded with the sum of money within 14 days, they wouldn't continue with any legal proceedings. As far as I am aware, Brent Wilson has always been a credited writer on every song in A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, as the band shares songwriting credit between all of them. I am unaware if the band or the label stopped paying him royalties after he left the band. Despite several claims on MySpace from his brother, Wilson never entered formal litigation with Panic at the Disco, and they settled out of court, as said in an interview with Alternative Press in 2008. Now, when writing these videos, I try to present most information in a consistent timeline. However, right now I have to step out of it, because I don't want to throw information about Brent Wilson to the end of the video when he really won't be relevant to Panic at the Disco or the story I'm trying to tell after this. So we're jumping out for a little bit, but then we'll jump back into the main timeline. In July 2018, Wilson pleaded guilty to one count of possession of a controlled substance and was sentenced to 3 years probation. On January 22nd, 2021, Wilson was pulled over for traffic violations, including failing to yield to oncoming traffic, with an officer there saying he was forced to hit his brakes in order to avoid collision, in his report. He was identified and found in violation of his curfew, a condition of his probation. Officers found a small baggie which they believed contained heroin on his person, along with a white powder substance and a Glock 17 handgun in his car. It is illegal for a convicted felon to own a handgun in the state of Nevada. On March 16, 2021, Wilson was federally indicted on 3 counts of possession of narcotics, specifically methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin, and 1 count of felon in possession of a firearm. Dustin Marcello, Wilson's attorney, believes the federal government took interest in the case because, quote, he has some amount of notoriety. He's semi-famous, so they get more out of prosecuting someone that more people are going to see. Wilson's departure from Panic had very little impact on their schedule. Their first headliner, beginning just a few weeks later, wasn't even delayed, with Wilson's place quickly filled by John Walker, a friend of the band. A Panic at the Disco show at this time was not what you'd expect from your general associated with Fall Out Boy wheelhouse. Their first headlining tour brought on both Lucent Dossier Experience and the Dresden Dolls, and it wasn't going to get any less out there when they announced their first stadium tour set for fall of 2006, just over a year after Fever. The Nothing Rhymes with Circus tour began in November of 2006, featuring Block Party and Jack's Mannequin as opening acts, and an incredibly theatrical production. While out on this tour, they released a deluxe edition box set of A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, featuring a live DVD of a set filmed on July 22nd, 2006 in Denver, Colorado, naturally called Live in Denver. In 2007, after wrapping touring on Fever, Panic at the Disco retreated to a cabin in the mountains of Nevada to try and start writing their next record. In this time, they write Cricket and Clover, which, according to combinations of several accounts, has to have been a very strange record. Structureless, opera, film score, weird, dense, beautiful, downtrodden, in contrast to the uplifting record that was released. There's not really a way to piece through all of these accounts and deduce what Cricket and Clover sounded like. It was scrapped about 3/4 of the way through being finished, according to Ryan Ross, Brent and Urie said they had 6 songs they weren't super happy about. The record was supposed to be a concept record about 2 lovers named Cricket and Clover, which fits with the 2 songs that we have been lucky enough to hear off of Cricket and Clover. During live shows in summer of 2007, Panic at the Disco played a song called It's True Love, which they were writing at the time. It's a relatively natural sonic evolution from Fever, at least in the recordings I've heard, but it's a little bit more experimental, like the band was saying. The lyrics follow the concept of the 2 lovers. It's kind of vague, but like the song's called It's True Love, it's for a concept record. The second song we've heard is an early version of a song we now know as Nearly Witches, which was released on the Fall Out Boy mixtape Welcome to the New Administration, at the time called Paul Revere Jumpsuit Apparatus.
I fell from the heavens as a fetish blessed with an operatic skeleton. And as the stars watch me descend, I cracked the family tree and chopped off all of the branches.
After scrapping Cricket and Clover, Panic at the Disco moved back to their first rehearsal space in Las Vegas, Nevada to start their sophomore record from scratch. The first song they wrote back home, 9 in the Afternoon, has some sonic similarities to what we've heard off Cricket and Clover.
We're feeling so good, just the way that we do.
But the band felt much happier with it, and continued to write their album with a clear goal in mind. Ryan Ross told MTV that the band was focused on simplicity, writing each song starting with just an acoustic guitar and vocals, which, in my personal experience, leaves you with a better song at its core. In January 2008, the Panic at the Disco website was updated, dropping the exclamation point from the name and showcasing the new aesthetic for this era of the band, which was much softer and more toned down than their previous look. Pretty odd, Panic at the Disco's sophomore record was released on March 21st, 2008. The sound is a stark contrast to Fever, being far more organic and relaxed. It shows off early rock influences like the Beatles and Pet Sounds era Beach Boys. Pretty Odd debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, though the lead single, 9 in the Afternoon, only peaked at number 51 on the Hot 100. They started touring on it by headlining the 2008 Honda Civic Tour with the Hush Sound, Motion City soundtrack, Death Cab for Cutie, and Phantom Planet opening. The visuals on this tour were still out there compared to the bands that they were touring with, but it was significantly more toned down with just extra stage design and costumes. Their stage was covered in flowers, and each member was dressed in vintage-style vests and dress shirts. In the fall, they co-headlined the 2008 Rock Band Live tour with Dashboard Confessional, featuring Plain White Tees and The Cab as openers. On this tour in Chicago, they recorded their second live album, Live in Chicago, whose DVD featured the short film Panic at the Disco in An American Valley, and a tour documentary called All in a Daze. It was released December 2nd, 2008. Panic also partnered with environmental organizations on this tour, namely Reverb, an organization that helps with environmentally friendly touring, and Global Inheritance, an organization to inspire eco-activism. On July 6th, 2009, an announcement was posted to Panic at the Disco's website. Ross and Walker had left the band. Now, if that's sudden, I think I've given you an accurate view of how Panic fans were feeling at the time, at least from the accounts that I've read. The statement said that it was for creative differences, stating that they have evolved in different directions, which has compromised what each of us want to personally achieve. This statement, from Ross and Walker, was confirmed by a later statement from Smith and Urie. It would be just the 2 of them continuing Panic at the Disco. Ross told MTV just a week later that it was coming for at least a couple of months.
John and I had been writing a bunch of stuff on the road. And it just got to a point when we were off tour, when we were talking about getting together and working on this stuff, that it became pretty apparent that we all weren't wanting to go in the same direction.
Along with mentioning there was a period where the 2 halves of the band weren't speaking to each other. The primary creative divide, according to Ross, is between himself and Urie, saying Urie wanted to make more modern pop music, and Ross was making more retro rock. After a couple months of non-communication, Ross and Smith met for lunch and decided that they should part ways. Smith and Urie continued to be Panic at the Disco, bringing back the exclamation point. Their August 2009 tour plans with Blink-182 weren't adjusted at all, and their first song without the recently split members, New Perspective, for the Jennifer's Body soundtrack, was released on July 28, 2009. For the tour with Blink, they brought on guitarist Ian Crawford, formerly of The Cab, and bassist Dallin Weeks of the Brobecks as touring members. At the end of July, Ross and Walker released their first single of their new group, the Young Vanes, entitled Change, along with announcing their first record, Take a Vacation. They brought on additional members, namely drummer Nick Murray, bassist Andy Sukol, and keyboardist Nick White in late 2009. They released Take a Vacation in June of 2010. Around the time of Take a Vacation's release, the Young Vanes appeared in alternative press and were asked about Panic at the Disco's continuation.
Were you upset when you realized the other two guys planned on carrying on the band without you?
I was shocked. I didn't think that was going to happen. Me and John were under the impression that we'd all start fresh. We didn't know anything about them carrying on until they were on tour. Maybe in some way it was like they were hiding it from us or something. I was just like, wow, we're doing this new thing from the ground up and you guys just get to play the songs we wrote? At this point, I get it. I can see why. They loved being in that band or whatever and didn't want to see it stop. I figured all of us wanted to stop.
It's a weird situation because there was never really any animosity. But I think their decision to continue on as Panic at the Disco really goes hand in hand with their mentality and work ethic and their idea of actually being in a band.
Are you saying they're more careerist?
Well, I'm saying they would rather play someone else's songs than try to write their own.
Walker said on Twitter afterwards that he regrets being slanderous and disrespectful. Panic at the Disco began writing for their third album sometime in 2009. Based on other interviews, I'm going to guess it was during the period where the two halves of the band weren't speaking to each other. They entered the studio in early 2010 and began putting together a record. They worked with producers Butch Walker, known for producing Avril Lavigne, Fall Out Boy, and Weezer, and John Feldman, known for producing The Used. And they brought on Pete Wentz of Fall Out Boy as a co-writer. While they were in the studio, Dallin Weeks was made the band's official bassist and came up with art concepts for Panic's upcoming record, Vices and Virtues, which they announced in January of 2011. Weeks also appears on the cover, though masked and in the background. The first single, The Ballad of the Mona Lisa, was released in February of 2011, with the music video solidifying the steampunk visual aesthetic of the album. Released on March 22nd, 2011, Vices and Virtues is closer to the follow-up record people expected after A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, down to including a full version of the Cricket and Clover demo now called Nearly Witches Ever Since We Met. The legacy of Fever looms over the band, and Vices and Virtues seems to be, especially Yuri's attempt to call back to that. They plan their upcoming Vices and Virtues tour to be more theatrical, with Yuri telling Spin magazine that he really misses wearing costumes and makeup. They brought on Fun, Funeral Party, Foxy Shazam, Neon Trees, and Patrick Stump as openers, and went out on this world tour. After touring on Vices wrapped up, Ian Crawford, who had been touring with the band since 2009, parted ways with the band. On Twitter he said,
"I want to bring back real, genuine music. I don't want to get rich or die trying."
And with that, Panic at the Disco was back in the studio, working on their fourth album, their first as a trio. On July 15th, Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die was announced, with a release date set for October 8th, 2013. A month before Panic at the Disco was set to go out on the Save Rock and Roll Arena tour opening for Fall Out Boy alongside 21 Pilots, Spencer Smith did an exclusive interview with MTV where he discussed his struggles with alcohol and substance abuse. He confessed that he'd used substances to cope with his anxiety about the sudden fame brought on by the success of A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, and it only got worse from there, to the point where he says he was rarely sober while they were recording Vices and Virtues. Smith expresses relief about his sobriety, but was nervous about going on tour.
I'm going to be in hotel rooms where alcohol is readily available, but I'm lucky to be in a band that isn't Guns N' Roses or something. It's a great thing to not have to feel like I'm having to alter everybody else's life so that I can fit in.
Not long after, Brent and Uri announced on their website that Smith would be taking some time away from Panic at the Disco to continue his recovery. Smith had mentioned in the original interview that alcohol wouldn't be banned backstage, despite the band's support for his sobriety. The tour was set to continue on without Smith, allowing him more time to focus on recovering. Now, not to have opinions in the middle of this pretty heavy part of the video, but I think if they had that as an option, they just should have not had alcohol backstage. At this point in the band, it would have been just for Brent and Uri as far as members of the band go, because Spencer would have been sober, and Dallin Weeks doesn't drink due to his faith. And I know that most of Fall Out Boy is or has been straight edge at some point, so I feel like because they've known them for a long time, they probably could have just asked for it. However, I might know nothing about touring, and maybe I'm being unreasonable. However, if they had that as an option, I don't know why they didn't go for it. Smith's permanent departure from Panic at the Disco was announced in April of 2015 in a lengthy statement detailing a lot of the band's history. He says his reason for leaving is that he couldn't be there for the band in the way he wanted or needed to be. Also in 2015, Dallin Weekes went back to just being a touring member of Panic at the Disco. Back in 2014, Brendon Urie had done an interview with G1 where he said he was already thinking about a new album, which he hadn't decided whether it would be a Panic album or a solo album. And now, in 2015, he's in the studio working on Panic at the Disco's 5th album, and the band is now his solo project. Death of a Bachelor, the culmination of all this work, was released on January 15th, 2016. A live album for its subsequent tour, All My Friends Were Glorious, was released on December 15th, 2017, and not long after, Dallin Weekes announced his permanent departure from Panic at the Disco to focus on his new band, I Don't Know How But They Found Me, a duo with drummer Ryan Seaman, formerly of Falling in Reverse. Brendon Urie has released Pray for the Wicked and Viva Las Vengeance under the Panic at the Disco name, continuing to be very successful despite the resurfacing of his many wrongdoings, which we're not going to talk about here because it's not part of my thesis, and you can Google it. Dallin Weekes is still working on I Don't Know How But They Found Me, which released their debut album, Razzmatazz, on October 23rd, 2020. Spencer Smith has worked in talent acquisition for DCD2, the new name of Decade Dance, since at least 2018. The Young Vanes went on hiatus at the end of 2010, but released Take a Vacation to streaming platforms in 2019. John Walker has released 3 albums and 4 EPs solo since the Young Vanes have gone on hiatus. In chronological order, they are Home Recordings, New Songs, Crazy Dream, Connections, Real Life, Impending Bloom, and Different. In October of 2018, he made a few tweets about finding old Cricket and Clover and Pretty Odd demos at his dad's place, but as far as I'm aware, he hasn't been given any clearance to release them. Ryan Ross has done much less since the Young Vanes went on hiatus, having released a few songs to his SoundCloud page in 2013, and collaborating with Z Berg on several projects, including the Dead End Kids Club. Brent Wilson is either detained or on bail pending federal trial. And we come back to that question. Was Panic at the Disco doomed from the start? Well, first off, I think throwing 4 teenagers into ultra fame without any preparation, they didn't play a single show before they got signed, is a recipe for disaster. As a 17-year-old, I think if Pete Wentz of Fall Out Boy showed up at my rehearsal space, immediately decided to sign my band, and then our first record went double platinum, I don't think I'd cope with any of that well. And I do think fame is the real downfall of Panic at the Disco. None of the things I talked about in this video would have been half as dramatic if they didn't have millions of fans focused on and angry about every action. I think Urie and Smith's decision to continue Panic at the Disco after that big split was in poor spirit, as much as it was absolutely a good financial decision for the both of them. But mostly, I think this was a deep dive into a band people are interested in, and it's gonna get me fucking clicks. But honestly though, I think Panic at the Disco could have been like a solid legacy band if they just like released their first 2 albums and then split up, and then you have 2 solid records as the legacy for Panic at the Disco. And they're still making money off of them, like all these years later, and like, maybe Brendon Urie and Spencer Smith form a new band, and it makes Vices, and it's like, wow, alright. Anyway, that was my video about Panic at the Disco. It was a little bit of a quick video to separate my 2 Real Passion Project videos. You can check out the other video essays that I've written. There's one about Water Park's label drama. There's one about Folie à Deux and Fame. You can go watch those. They're all in a playlist. I'm in a band called Borderlinethrills. We have a single out called Don't Do This To Me Again Pickles that I'll link in the description and maybe in the card if I can find the YouTube for that. I also have solo music out. It's called Taylor Squared. I'll link it in the description, and you can listen to that too. Anyway, thank you all for watching.